Hello my friends, how are you doing? I'm back. In today's video, I'm going to teach you everything you need to know about CSS. So we are going to cover from CSS basics all the way to advanced. And by the end of this video, you'll be able to put in practice whatever you learn and build this beautiful website you are seeing here. By the way, if you want to have a closer look to this website, there is a link in the video description below. Just open the link and you'll be able to have a closer look of the website we are going to build after we master CSS. So previously I taught you about HTML, that is HTML from basics to HTML advanced, and we were able to build this website you can see here using HTML. And now we want to improve this website using CSS. And CSS is what will enable us move from this website, this ugly looking thing, to this beautiful website you can see here. So that's what we are going to do today. We are going to purely focus on CSS, and by the end of it, you'll master CSS and you'll know everything you need to know about CSS. So let's get started. I hope you are excited. I'm really excited to take you through this journey. So actually we are going to start from scratch. So we are going to start from an empty folder. So navigate to the place where you want to set up your project. In my case, I want to set it up here. So create a new folder. I'm going to name it CSS course. Okay, so once you have your empty folder, open this folder with the VS Code editor. I'm sure if you've taken one of my previous courses, you have VS Code editor installed in your machine. But if that's not the case, then let us install VS Code editor together. So go to your browser and type VS Code editor. Once you do that, you can go with the first option. So depending with your operating system, you'll find an option to download. So in my case, I'm using Windows. I can go ahead and click download. So just give it some time to download. So the download is now complete. Let's go to our download. So once you have the installer downloaded, you can double click and then run the installer. You'll be able to install. So I don't want to do that because I already have VS Code installed in my machine, but the process is quite simple. Just check off all the options and then run next. In a few minutes, you have everything ready set up. So I'm assuming now you have VS Code editor installed in your machine. So once you do that, we can go back to our project, to the empty folder we created. And now we need to open this folder in VS Code editor. So there are several options to do this. So I'm going to run through the various options we have. So one of the options is just to open VS Code editor and then drag and drop the folder. So let me navigate to the desktop. So from here, if you have it here, you can just double click and open the VS Code editor. So once you have it open, you can navigate to where you have your project. And then I just want to minimize this. Okay, so once you're here, just drag your folder and drop it in VS Code editor. So that way you'll be able to open the folder. Alternatively, let's close. Alternatively, if you don't have VS Code editor here, you can just search in your apps. So in my case, VS Code editor, and then I open the app. So once you open, the process is the same. Alternatively, I can open VS Code editor first. And then once I have it open, I can come here, choose open a file, or rather I want to open a folder. So open a folder, and then I navigate to where I have my project. And then I choose the folder I want to open, select folder. I'll be able to open my folder. We have another option again. So when you are installing, you could have seen an option to add VS Code editor in your file explorer. So in that case, if you did that, when you right click the folder, you see an option to open the folder with VS Code editor. So in my case here, I don't see that option, but that's fine because that's just one of the options. And then we still have another option. If you right click, you might see this option, open in terminal. So I can also choose this option, open in terminal. And then in this case, I type code dot. Yeah, so if I do that, I'll be able to open this folder again. Yeah, so those are 4 options. You can use any option that works for you. Okay, so now we have an empty folder. So let's get started. Yeah, so our folder is empty. That's why we can't see anything here. Yeah, so the first thing we want to do is to just add an empty file, name it index.html. Okay, so make sure you have this extension .html. Once you do that, you can type exclamation mark, enter. This will create a boilerplate template that we can use to get started. So let me change the title here and say learning CSS. And then I want to just copy the text here. Just to have something, I can have H1 here. I type H1. Make sure it's in small letters. H1. And then I want to say learning CSS is easy. Yeah, so once you do that, we want to run this page in a browser so that we can see our changes. So for us to be able to run this page, we need an extension that will run a local server in our machine that will enable us to serve this page in the browser. Yeah, so I have that extension installed, but if you don't have it, come to this place where you see extensions and then type live server. Among the results, you'll see this result, the one with over 66 million installs. Yeah, so just click install. So in my case, I already have it installed. So once you do that, when you come back to your page, you will see this option, go live. So if you don't see this option, maybe you've minimized your page, you can try to maximize it. Alternatively, when you right click on the page, you will see an option somewhere to open with live server. So this is the option. Yeah, so you can click this. Alternatively, you can click this. Yeah, so once you do that, you see your page now is running in the browser. Okay, so to make our work easy, let me set this side by side with our browser so that we can be able to see the changes as we work on them. Okay, so to give us some space, you can close the sidebar by clicking here. Alternatively, when you click Ctrl B, you will toggle between opening and closing. Yeah, so now we have our page running here. So if we make any change and save, we see the change reflected. Yeah, so with this setup, we can start learning CSS. So first things first, what is CSS? CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheet and is used to style our HTML elements by controlling layouts, colors, fonts, spacing, and more. Yeah, so generally it enhances website presentation and enables responsive design. So when you come back to our page here, the one I showed you earlier, you can see this page is done using only HTML. But by adding CSS, we are able to improve the website to something that looks beautiful. So CSS is helping us designing the layout, the colors, the fonts, styling the images, and everything you see here, we've done it using CSS. So HTML lays the structure of the website, but we use CSS to improve the presentation, to style our website and make it look presentable and beautiful. So we are seeing another term here, cascading. So what is cascading? Cascading is more like a waterfall. You see water starts at the top as it flows down. So this is the same principle in CSS, where styles starts from the top, and then the first rules you write in your CSS file flow down, but later rules or more specific ones can override the one you did earlier. So I'm going to show you an example so that you can better conceptualize this. But beside that, there are different ways in which we add CSS to our HTML document. So we have 3 different ways of adding CSS to our HTML. And the first way is using inline CSS. So let me show you that. So in our simple page here, we have this title. So this is a HTML element. So let's say we wanted to design this element using inline styles. We are able to achieve this using a HTML attribute that is available in all HTML elements. This attribute is called style. And when you type style, it writes it for you. So you see style equal sign, and then you have full colon. Yeah, so within this, you can now type your styles. So let's say we wanted to use a property color. And then you type your property name, and then full colon, and then value. Let's say value you wanted red, and then semicolon to finish. Yeah, so you can see our text, we've styled our text, and now our text is red. So after the semicolon, you can add another property. Let's say we wanted to add a property where we say text decoration. We say underline. Yeah, so you see our style is being applied on the element. You can even add as many styles as you wish here. Let's say we wanted to add background color. So I can say BCC. I see an option here, and then we have full colon, and then we can say, let's say gray. I'm just doing this as an example. So you can add anything you want here within this style attribute. But as you can see already, this is making our HTML page to be very crowded. So assuming that we had to do all this for all the elements, our page will be unmanageable. And for that reason, actually, this is not a recommended way to add CSS styles. But the good thing, we have different options to do it. So the second option is using internal CSS, where we include a style HTML element inside the head of our HTML document. So let me show you this. So instead of adding our styles here within the element, we can actually remove it. And then we want to use internal CSS. So come to your head element, and then within the head element, type style. So within this HTML element, that's where you'll have your styles. So once you do that, you can type the element we want to target. In this case, we want to target H1. So type H1, and then open curly brackets, close curly brackets. And then within the brackets, we want to add our styles. Yeah, so in this case, we want to target different properties. So the first property is color. So just type color, and then a full colon. And then you can say, for example, red. We want to replicate what we had earlier. And then we also had text decoration. Let's choose text decoration. You have full colon, and then you can type, for example, underline. And then we have our styles here. So by the way, to save, Control S to save. And then let's say we also have a background color. We can choose whatever color we want here. Let's say, for example, gray. Yeah, so we see we are applying our styles. And we can target several elements. So maybe we can just let's add an element here. Type P for paragraph, and then enter. And then here, let me just have some dummy text. I can just type lorem. Then I will have my paragraph there. Let me add another paragraph, P, enter. And then if, let's say, I want 20 characters, or rather 20 words, I can just type lorem, lorem 20. You have 20 words. Yeah, so this is my second paragraph. So I want to target the paragraph and style it also. So I come here within my styles and then target the paragraph, type P, and then curly brackets, open close. And then within here, let's say I want to change the font size. I can give it something like 20 pixels. And then let's say color, whatever reason I want to give it blue. So now you see we are able to style our text by targeting the paragraph. Okay, so beside the internal CSS, we also have another way, which is the recommended way. And the best practice, it's using external CSS, where we link a CSS file into the HTML document. So to do that, we need to come to our files here. You can do that by just clicking Ctrl B. And then once we are here, I want you to add another file. So you can type new file, and then let's call it style. You can call it any name, but let's call it style CSS. And then once you have it as style CSS, so make sure it has .css at the end as the file extension. So once we do that, we come to our HTML file, and what we need is to link it. So for now, I can just disable this, the styles we already have. So I can highlight and then Control/, and then save, Control S to save. So you see we've removed our styling on the element. Yeah, so now we want to use external CSS where we link a file and then apply our styles. So for us to do that, all we need to do is within the head element, just type link, and then link, you can just type link and then full colon, you see an option here. VS Code editor is very helpful, it's suggesting the options. So you can choose link full colon CSS. So here is a link. It has an attribute that says this is a style sheet. And then beside that, we have a href that is linking to our file. Yeah, so make sure that this name should match the name we have here. If you use a different name, just make sure that you're using the same name here. So you can actually type and update it to reflect the name you have for your file. Yeah, so once you do that, already you've linked this HTML document with CSS. So what we want is we want to apply our styles inside our CSS instead of applying them in the HTML document. So we can just highlight this, Control/, we uncomment them out, and then what I want is just to cut the styles. So I cut the styles, I can actually remove this element and then type the styles here. So once I do that and save, you see our styles are being applied. But now the good thing is our HTML document is very clean and we have our CSS in a separate file. Yeah, so this helps in having separation of concerns where your HTML deals with HTML and CSS deals with CSS. So that way it will be very, very easy for you to manage and maintain your files. Okay, so beside linking an external file, I also wanted to show you something here. When you open this link, it will open this page where I have my CSS hosted somewhere. So what I want you to do is to copy this link. And then when you copy this link, it will reference these styles. So let's go back to our page. I also wanted to show you a different version of this external CSS. So let's comment out this first line here. And then I want us to add a link and then still CSS. And then instead of referencing our file, I want us to reference the link we've just copied. And when you paste the link and apply the link and apply the changes, you see our styles from an external link are being reflected in our browser. So what I wanted to show you is beside using a relative link, that is linking to a file that is within your project, you can link to an external file. So in this case, this is an absolute link, a link that is hosted elsewhere, but still it has CSS styles that I'm able to incorporate in my project. So this is mostly used in CSS libraries. These are libraries that they already have predefined styles. So if you want to use them, you can just add the link and you'll be able to apply those styles into your project. Yeah, so I just wanted to highlight this so that you see, apart from just using relative link, you can use absolute link, a link that is hosted elsewhere. Yeah, so with that said, let's go back to what we had. Yeah, so these are the different ways that you use to link your CSS to your HTML document. So just to highlight, this is not a recommended way because it makes our HTML document crowded. And then for this one, you can use this one if you're only working with one page that won't have a lot of styles. But in most cases, using this is the best approach, using external CSS, where you have a separate file for style sheets and a separate file for HTML documents. Yeah, so now let's talk about CSS syntax. I'm sure you're wondering, where are these properties coming from? For example, we've used things like color, font size, and so on. Yeah, so now it's the time to talk about the CSS syntax. So CSS syntax is just the way CSS is written. And luckily, the syntax is very straightforward. Yeah, so we can see here, first of all, we have what we call selector. This is the element you're targeting. And then beside that, we have an opening curly brackets, closing curly brackets. And then within this, we have what we call declarations, where we have a property and a value. Yeah, so you can see here, this example. So selector, let's say we have a selector where we are selecting a paragraph, and then we have our declaration block where we have a property and a value. Yeah, so there are different types of selectors. So let's just go through them one by one and you'll be able to see the difference. So first we have element selectors. This is selecting a HTML element using HTML element tag. For example, h1, paragraph, div, and so on. So we've actually used this already. The second way is using a class attribute, adding a class attribute to a HTML element. Yeah, so let me show you that. So here we are. Currently, we are targeting our elements using element selector. So when we check here, you see we are targeting the paragraph and then we are applying these styles to the paragraph. So let's say we wanted to target this particular paragraph and not the first paragraph. So one way to achieve that is using a class attribute. So what we need to do is within the opening tag of the element, we can add an attribute and say class. And then when you type enter, you have it pre-filled for you. So you have curly brackets. So within the curly brackets, you can give this element a name of your choice. So let's say we want to call our class, let's say P2 for paragraph 2. So if I save, okay, of course, nothing happens here, but at least now we can select our element using the class we've just applied. And then come down. And then this is how we write a class. So we start with a dot or a period and then say P2 for paragraph 2 and then open curly bracket, close curly bracket. Yeah, so previously when using an element, you just type the element name, but for a class, you use a period, that is a dot, and then the name of the class. And then with that, now you can style. Let's say, for example, color, you say purple. So now you see we've been able to target a specific paragraph using a class. And also, a good thing with a class is that you can apply a class to several elements that share similar properties. For example, let's say we have another paragraph here that we want to style. We can add a paragraph. Let's create some space, P, enter. So let's say this one is lorem 10. So I also want to apply the same styles I have here. So all I need to do is to add a class. So I can say class, and then I just add P2. So I don't have to define the class again. I just reuse the class and I'm able to apply the styles. Yeah, so you can see, assume that we had to use, let's say, the style attribute where we are using inline styling. It will be very, very difficult to reuse our styles. But with having an external CSS, we are able to do that. And just add the class, and you already apply all the properties we have in that class. So another way to select a HTML element is to use an ID attribute of an element. So let me show you that. So let's say I want to add another heading here. I can say this is heading 2. So to add an ID attribute, I come to the opening tag, I add some space, ID, opening quotes, closing quotes, and then within here, I can say my H2 for heading 2. So I'm uniquely identifying this element using this ID. So now here, this is how you add an ID to your CSS styles. So first of all, you use a hashtag and then the ID name was my H2, and then open curly brackets, close curly brackets, and then here you can add your properties. So you can say, let's say font size, I say 26 pixels. I think 26 is quite small. We can say 40. And so you can see our heading is taking the effect. We can even say color. Let's say color green. Yeah, so you see we are able to target this element using an ID. Yeah, so that's how you target a HTML element using an ID. Yeah, so 99% of the time you'll be okay using a class because a challenge with the ID is that ID you cannot reuse. For an ID, you only use it once in a HTML element. For example, we cannot have another H2 here and then define the same ID. That will not work. But for a class, you can actually reuse a class the same way we are having it here. Okay, but that's not to say that an ID doesn't have its function. It's mostly used in when working with JavaScript, where we can uniquely target a specific element in HTML and maybe manipulate or modify that particular element using JavaScript. Yeah, so it has its use, but don't use it to do your styling, or you can maybe use it very sparingly. Yeah, so beside using an ID, you can use what we call group selector. This enables you to target specific elements together. For example, let's say we wanted to target all these elements and then apply a specific styling. So in this case, we can come here and say, let's say we want to have a group selector where we are targeting H1. And then how you define group selectors is use a comma to separate. Then we have a paragraph, for example, and then we have our ID. And then still you open curly bracket, close curly bracket, and then you can apply your stylings here. So let's just apply some ridiculous styling here. So let's say border, not border radius, but border. I want to say solid, 2 pixels, and then color red. Yeah, so you can see we are targeting all the different elements in one go using a group selector. Yeah, so for a group selector, you can have any type of selector here. So for example, you see here we have element selector, we have an ID selector, you can even have a class selector. So in fact, we can I can demonstrate that. Let's say we are targeting H2 instead of all paragraphs. So you can see we are targeting the paragraphs that have the class of P2. Okay, so we can remove this. Maybe I can just comment it out for reference, perhaps. Yeah, so to how you comment out is highlight and then control / or command / if you're using a Mac. Okay, so beside the group selector, we also have attribute selectors. This is selecting a HTML element using a specific attribute. For example, let's say we have this paragraph that has an attribute here. You can call it, let's say, title attribute. And then for whatever reason, we have this text, hello. Yeah, so this paragraph is having a title attribute that has text hello. So here we can actually target here. We can actually target it here in our CSS. So we say a paragraph, and then you open square brackets, and then we say title. You can specify the title, or you can just target the paragraph with the title, and then say, let's say color. We want the color to be green. Yeah, so we see we are able to apply this color using this selector. So if you had more than one paragraph with the attribute title, then you might need to specify the name of the title. So in this case, we can say we want the paragraph with the title hello. Yeah, and then you can see we are still applying our styles here. So if I misspell the word hello, the styling will not take effect, because here I'm saying I want a paragraph with the title that says something different. Yeah, so that is an attribute selector. So you can just have it as an attribute, or if you want to be more specific, you can say the attribute, you can add the attribute value to that selector. Yeah, so this is another selector, but I also think this is rarely used. So moving on, we have what we call a pseudo class. A pseudo class means it's like a fake class. Yeah. So how you define a pseudo class is you add a colon next to the class, and then you can define your properties. So let me show you so that you can better understand. So mostly we use a pseudo class, for example, for things like a button. So let's say we had a button here that says click me. Okay, so with our button, we can add a class and say btn. And then using the class, if you want to switch between the tabs that you recently opened, you can control tab, you will switch between the tabs. Yeah, so here we want to target our button. So .btn, to make sure the spellings is correct. And then once you have that, we can add things like, let's add some basic styles here. Padding, say 10 pixels and 20 pixels. Don't worry, we'll go through all these as we move on. So for now, I'm just showing you font size. Let's say we want 18 pixels. Yeah, so we want to talk about the pseudo class. So pseudo class, these are the regular classes we have. But if you want to add a pseudo class, this is how you add it. So let's say we want to again add this class btn, but we don't want to target the btn class, but we want the pseudo class. Yeah, so you can add full colon here and say, for example, hover, and then open curly brackets, close curly bracket. So when we hover, assume we want to add a background color. Let's say background color, we want it to be red for whatever reason. Yeah, so this is the class that is only applied in a specific state of our element. So here we are saying when we hover the element, we want the background to be red. So when I hover on this element, the background changes. Yeah, so this is a pseudo class that we are applying to the btn. You can even change things like, let's say, font size. Let's say when we hover, we want font size to increase to something like 30. So when we hover, you see what's happening. Our font is changing. Yeah. So this transition is quite rough, but as we move on, we'll see how we can make it smooth. Okay, so that is a pseudo class. Maybe I can show you one more example. So let's add a link here. So it will lead to nowhere for now. We can just say this is a link. Okay, so this link usually has different states. So first of all, let's add a class so that we can target the link class, and then we can say, you can just say link. And then in our CSS here, when you come here, you can target the link. And then for a link, we usually have different states. So one of the state is just a link. Another state is hover. So you can type link and then hover. Another state on a link is active when the link has been clicked. The final state is visited when a link has been visited. Yeah, so for example, when I visit this link, you see the color changes. It's different from when I didn't visit the link. So these are the 4 different states a HTML anchor tag can have. Yeah, so we have link, hover, active, and visited. In most cases, we usually group them together. So let me show you. So we usually group link, that is the default, together with visited, because sometimes you want, if someone visits a website, the link doesn't have this weird color. So in most cases, we usually group them together. So now that I showed you how we can group different selectors, so let's do that. So you can say link and then visited. So usually group link and visited together. So we can remove this. And also we usually group hover together with active. So we can add a comma there and then copy the active and then have it here. So we can remove this. Yeah, so we have these first states, and then we have this when you hover, we want this. So some of the common styling we have here is, for example, let's say text decoration, where we don't want it to be underlined by default. So you can just say none to remove the text decoration. If you save, you see the line is gone. We can add, let's say, font size. We say 18 pixels. And then let's say font weight, say 600. You see it's now bold. Yeah, so our link, we've been able to style it like this, but when I hover, you see it stays the same. So let's say when I hover, I want it to turn to red. So I can just say color and then red. And then maybe text decoration. And let's say underline. Yeah, so this what happens. So when I hover, it changes to red and then it applies the text decoration. Yeah, so this covers a pseudo class. So now after a pseudo class, we have what we call a pseudo element. This is like a fake element, an element you create using CSS. So how you define a pseudo element is you use a pair of full colon, that is 2 full colon, and then you can either add before or after. So this is used to insert content before or after an element. So this works with any HTML element. So as an example, let's say we wanted to add a pseudo element on the heading 2. First of all, let me add a class. And then I say my h2. There you can have the same name for ID and a class. So I have this class. So I want to add a pseudo element on this element. Yeah, so I go to my CSS. And then here, I want to target that class that I call my h2. And then for us to add a pseudo element, what we need, instead of having a single colon, we need a double colon. And then we can either target before or after the element. Before or after the element. Yeah, so in this case, I want to say, for example, before. And then before this element, what you need to do is, first of all, you add some content here. So content can be anything. So let's say I just want to add hello and hello and then some full colon. If I do that, you can see already I've added this. So this looks like an element, but it's like a fake element because I'm adding the element through CSS. Yeah. So I have that, and then also you can add some more properties here. So let's say I want to style this content differently. So here I can add some other things. Let's say I want a background color of blue. If I save, you see, I can also say, let's say color white. Yeah, so you see we've been able to style our element differently by targeting a pseudo element. Yeah, so let's change this to after and see how it looks. So here you can say after. Yeah, so you see our element is after. After this element, we have our pseudo element. Yeah, so the most important thing is having this attribute content, because this is what defines the content that we are inserting as the pseudo element. Yeah, so it's as easy as that. First of all, you target the element where you want to apply the pseudo element. Yeah, so in this case, it's this element using this class, my h2, and then you use full colon without space. You can either target after or before, and then you have that. Yeah, so we are going to practice this with some practical examples, and then you see how you can use this. And by the way, you can even have both. So let me highlight this, and then Shift Alt downward arrow to duplicate. So once I have this, let me say I also want before. So I'm targeting the same element. I have before and after. So we can change the content. Let's say, I don't know, we just want to add some hashes here. And hashes here. So when I save, you see I'm having hashes. I think I can remove this and comment out this. Yeah, so now we see we have our element, and then we have some pseudo element before and after. And finally, we have what we call a universal selector. This selects every element of a HTML document. Yeah, so sometimes you might want to apply a certain setting or style to every element in a HTML document. So you use a universal selector. Yeah, so this is how you define it. In your CSS, you can say asterisk and then open curly bracket, close curly bracket. And let's say we want to add a border to every element in our document. Let's say border and then solid, and then let's say 4 pixels red. Yeah, so you see everything in our page. We are targeting the div, we are targeting the elements, everything has a border. Yeah, so in this case, you can see this is not so useful, but it has some use cases that we'll explore in our project. So in a practical way, it's usually used to reset a HTML styling, because in most cases you realize like this HTML already has some styling that have been defined already. For example, a heading element usually has a padding that is already defined, some padding, some margins, and so on. So this is usually used to reset if you want to apply to customize everything the way you want it. So let's talk about cascading nature of CSS. The cascading nature of CSS refers to how CSS resolves conflict when multiple styles are applied to the same element. So these rules determine which styles take precedence when there is a conflict. Yeah, for example, here we have our paragraph. So assume that inside our CSS, we are targeting these paragraphs and applying some conflicting styles. So let's say inside our CSS here, we are targeting, let's say we target H2, and then we apply, let's say, color, let's say color red. And then beside that, let's say we also target the same element with a class now. The name of the class is my H2. So let's say we target the same element and say my H2. And then we give it a color of, let's say, purple. You see purple is taking precedence, and then assume we also have another target here where we are using ID. So our ID is also called my H2. And then let's say here we say color blue. So what you're seeing is that we have all these styles applied, but the color blue is taking precedence. So there is a reason why the color blue is being applied and not red or pink. Yeah, so that's what we want to explore. So there are some key factors that determine which property is applied if we have conflicting properties. So the number one factor is importance. So first of all, inline styles. These are styles that are written directly inside an element using a style attribute have the highest specificity. That is, they have the highest level of specificity because you are saying, I'm targeting this specific element and these are the styles I want. But beside that, we're also saying you can also add this important keyword inside a property that will enable you override all the other styles. So let's see this in practice. If I come here to my element and let's say I add another style using the style attribute, this is inline styling, the one we talked about earlier. So let's say I want this to have a specific color. Let's say orange. So I'm still targeting this element and then I'm saying I want color orange here. Let's see what happens. So you see our heading is turning to orange. So we've applied color orange to the element. At the same time, when you come here, we've also applied color red, we've applied color blue, we've applied color purple. But what makes orange apply instead of all these other colors? So the reason why color orange is applying is that a style that is applied directly to an element using a style attribute is more specific compared to all other styles. However, as you see here, there is also a way to override that. So let's say inside our styles here, we had this attribute important where we are saying, despite applying all the styles, we want this style to be very important. Yeah. So when you use a keyword important, you're able to override all the other styles with the style, the attribute where you've applied important. So despite the conflict, you are giving this highest priority. So this is able to override all the other styles. So while I'm showing you that you can use important to override the style, it's actually not a good practice to use importance, because if you use this, you might have some styling that are not applying, and then you wonder what's the reason. And the reason maybe is you added importance somewhere. So while you can use this, you use it very, very sparingly. In fact, the best practice is never to use it unless you have no other option than use it. So let's talk about specificity. So CSS rules are ranked by how specifically they target an element. So earlier we saw how, for example, an inline style have the highest specificity. Yeah, so they're actually ranked in this order, where we have inline styles, the highest specificity, followed by ID, followed by class, attribute, or pseudo class, and then followed by element, selector, or pseudo element. So when we come to our CSS, and for example, let's say we hover on this, I want to show you something. When you hover on the class or ID, you see this selector specificity that shows you this has the specificity of 1, 0, 0. So this means this is the order. First of all, we start with the ID and then class and then element. So when I hover on this, you see on the ID, so the first value represent ID. So you see ID, we have 1 ID, 0 class, all that. But if I hover on this, you see this is not an ID, so this is a class. So on the ID I have 0, on the class I have 1, and then on the element I have 0. When I hover on this, you see on the ID I have 0, here I have 1. Yeah, so whenever you're having your properties clashing, this is what is used to determine which property takes precedence over the other. Okay, so besides specificity, we also have the source order. So here, when two or more rules of the same specificity of importance, the one that appears later in the CSS file or in the document wins. Yeah, so let's say we are targeting H2. Here, I've commented out all the other styles. So no wonder you're seeing H2 being red. So let's say we still targeted H2 somewhere down in our file. And then we say, I want this to be blue. So what you're seeing is that our text turns to blue. So in this case, if you are targeting the same element with an element that have the same specificity, the one that you apply last take precedence over the other. We talked of cascading nature of CSS, where the styles that you apply later have the highest priority. Yeah. So this is the same case, because when you hover on this, you see they have the same specificity. If I hover on this, I'm seeing this preview that tells me selector specificity is 001. When I hover on this, they have the same specificity. So none of this has the higher priority than the other. But because of that, the one that we apply later take precedence. Okay, so that is the order. If you're having the same element, the same target with the same specificity, the one that comes later take precedence. So another factor is inheritance. So some properties like color or font properties are usually inherited by default. And then we have some properties that are not inherited, for example, margin and padding by default. And actually this is with a good reason. So let me show you this functionality. So let's say inside our document, instead of applying all these different colors, assume, in fact, let me just remove them, all of them. The styling on the text, I just want to remove. Let's say instead of just repeating all these styles in every element we select, let's say we wanted to apply to have some default setting for our HTML element. In that case, we can target the body, because body is the parent element that contains all the other elements of our HTML document. So let's say we wanted our page by default to have a color, our font to have a color of, let's say, red from the root. What you realize is that these styles are inherited by all the other elements. Yeah, so red doesn't look like a good color. So let's say we have this gray. So this color, you see we are defining it only once, but it's being inherited. So maybe I can show you here. You see all the other elements are within the body element. So body element is the parent of all these other child elements. So if we define some properties here, like the font and the color, we are able to inherit these properties in our other elements, not unless we choose to override a specific element. For example, you can say, this is the overall setting, but when you come to our, for example, let's say paragraph 2, we want the color to be blue. By doing this, you're saying, yes, this is the default setting, but for paragraph 2, this is what I want. Yeah, so the same, we can also apply properties like font. Let's say we want our default font size to be 18 pixels. You can do that at the root level, and then this style is able to be applied to every element. Yeah, so this actually makes our work easier, because you don't have to define the size of your text every time you use it. You can just define them sort of globally at the root level, and then CSS is able to inherit. But again, when you do this, you can easily override the specific styles. So I say there is a good reason why some properties are not inherited. Imagine we were to inherit the padding from the parent. It will break our page completely. Yeah, so you can inherit color, font family, font size, and so on. So by the way, we are going to put in practice all this so that it becomes clearer for you. So beside that, we have some default styles that are applied by the browser. So browser apply their default styles called user agent styles. So if no CSS is provided, these styles will apply, but you can easily override these styles. So to show you, Here I told you, I think I mentioned that this H1 already has some styles applied to it. So when I click on it and then choose inspect, when I select this element, you see we have some styles here that have already been applied. These are user agent styles that are applied if you don't apply any other styles. But again, you can easily override this by your own specific styles. These are applied to just make sure that at least your page looks okay before you start adding your own styles. Okay, so that's all about CSS specificity and cascading nature of CSS. Yeah, so I hope now you understand if you have conflicting styles, which styles take precedence and why. So I'll provide this document for your reference, so don't worry. So now let's shift gears a little bit and talk about the box model in CSS. So what is the box model? So every HTML element is a box with 4 sides. At least you can look at it that way. Yeah, so let's go to our page. So here, let's say we want to highlight this element. If you want to highlight this element, right click and then choose inspect. If I hover on this element, just click on it and then choose styles down here. So first of all, you have this for element, and then down here you can choose styles. So this can display differently depending with your settings. It can either be at the bottom as we have it here, or maybe on the side. Yeah, but for me, I think when I have it on the bottom, it's easier. So how to do that? You use these 3 dots, then I have it at the bottom. So here I can see my styles. So when I go down, I see this element represented in a box. When I hover on it, I see inside here I have the content of this element, and then outside here I have the padding, what surrounds this element, or rather the content of this element. And then if I was to add a border, I'll have it here, and then beside that I can also have a margin. So first of all, you have the content of this element, and then we can have a padding around the element, and then we can have a border, and then we can have a margin. Okay, so let's add some border to our heading. So first of all, we select it. Let's say heading 1, and then adding a border. You can say border style. Let's say solid, and then you can say border width. But then if you type BO and then width, you see that option. So you can say border width, let's say 2 pixels. And then you can say border color. You can have it as, let's say gray. Okay, so we see we've added our border here. Actually, there is an easier way. You can collapse all this and just say border. I'm sure you saw me use this. And then first of all, you start with the style. So you can say solid. And then size, you can say 2 pixels. And then color, you can say gray or green. And so when you do that, you see instead of having all these properties, we are collapsing them into this property. Yeah, but what I wanted to show you is when we come here to this box down here, you see now we have the element, and then we have our border, which is 2 pixels. For the padding, we still have 0. So padding is usually the space between the content and the border. So here, let's add some padding here. Say padding, can have padding top. Let's say we have padding of 10 pixels. And then if I save, let's see, so you see we have padding top 10 pixels. We can have padding right. Just type P and then right, and then padding right, let's say we have 5 pixels. So you see we have 10, 5, and then bottom, let's say we have padding bottom. Let's say we have 8 pixels. And then padding left, we have 6 pixels. So what you're seeing here, we have padding top 10 pixels, padding right 5 pixels, padding bottom 8 pixels, and then padding left 6 pixels. So you can actually collapse this into one, especially if, let's say, assume you had the same padding all round. So let's say we have 10 pixels, 10 pixels, and 10 pixels. Let's say we had the same padding all around. So you have 10, 10, 10, 10. This can be simplified by, instead of just saying that, you can just say padding 10 pixels. This means padding top, right, bottom, left. But assume that maybe you had a different padding for top and bottom, and left and right you had a different padding. In that case, you can, instead of having this, you can say, let's say you had padding, and then top and bottom you want 10 pixels, but again, left and right you want 20 pixels. Sorry, 20 pixels. You can just write it as pair. So this will mean top, bottom 10, right, left 10. So top, bottom. So this is top, bottom, and then right and left. Yeah, so you can collapse them in pairs. So for you to better understand the box model, it actually works. You can look at it as working as clockwise, where we start with top, and then right, and then bottom, and then left. Yeah, so this works for every element. So in this example, we're just highlighting the heading, but let's say we wanted to work with the paragraph. So here I can just make some space, and let's say I highlight this paragraph. So when I highlight this paragraph, actually you can hover on it or click this arrow you see here, and then click on the paragraph. You'll be able to select it. And then once you select it, when you come down here, you will see. So this is our paragraph. It has some padding. Okay, it doesn't have any padding, doesn't have any border, but it has some margin, top and bottom. No wonder you see we have some space between the heading and the paragraph. Okay, so let's talk about margin now. So let's go back to our heading. When I highlight the heading, you see that beside the border, we have some margin that has already been applied. I told you that these HTML elements, they have some settings that have already been applied, some styles that have already been applied. Yeah, so one of them is margin, which allows it to have some space above and below the element. You can also have margin right and left. So margin works the same way as padding, only that this is outside the element. You can see we have the border and then we have margin outside. Yeah, so the same way we can have it here. Let's say we wanted to have a margin top. Let's say we wanted top to have a margin of 40 pixels. And then right, we have a margin of 30 pixels. Left, or rather bottom, we have 20. And then left, we have 10. If we do that, when we come to our element, you see at the top we have margin of 40, right 30, bottom 20, left 10. Yeah, but let's say we wanted the same margin for top, bottom, and then the same margin for right, left. We can collapse this and say top, bottom we want 40, and then right, left we want 20. So we can have it as a pair. So here you see top, bottom we have 40, and then right, left we have 20. Yeah, so the same thing applies. If you want to have the same margin all round, you can just say margin, and this will apply top, right, bottom, and left. So here is a quick recap of CSS box model. So every element has some content. So this is the element together with its content. And then around that element, we can add some padding. And then after the padding, we can have a border. And then we can also have a margin. Yeah, so every element can be represented in this way. And this helps us to just know if we are applying a specific style, we know exactly what we are targeting. Yeah, so we have the content. So content is the actual text or image inside the element. And then we can apply some padding that is around the content. And then the outer edge surrounding the padding, we can apply border. And then margin is the space around the element. So by default, when I add a padding, border, or margin to an element, it changes the size of an element. So say this element has a height of 150 pixels. If I add a padding of 2, that is all round, and a border of 2 all round, and a margin of 2 all round, that is pixels, I will have a total height of, this will be 6 plus 6, that will be 12. So I'll add 12 to the height of 150 to have a height of 162 pixels. Yeah, so what is happening is that the padding, border, and margin, it's changing the size of the element. Yeah, so the same will happen to the width, where we'll have a width of 312 pixels, because I'm adding the border of 2 pixels, another 2 pixels, another 2 pixels, and then on the left side we have another 2, 2, 2. Yeah, so that is the default behavior. And sometimes you might not want that. You might want to define the size of your box or the size of your element. And then when you add padding, you might want the padding to be included within the size of the box. Same to border, same to margin. However, we can control that behavior by changing the property called box sizing, which by default is content box. We can change that and have it as a border box. So let me demonstrate that with an example. So here, let me add a container. I can just say dot container. This add a div with a class of container. So this is a shortcut to add a class. Yeah, so let's turn our focus to this container. So I have this container and I want to add 2 boxes. So I can just say dot box. And then this box, I want it to have 2 classes. So I can say dot box and then dot box 1. So when I enter, you see I'm adding a class of box and I'm adding another class of box 1. By the way, you can have 2 classes or even more classes in the class attribute. Yeah, so I want to duplicate this, and this other box, I give it a different identifier. I give it a class of box 2. So the reason I'm doing this, I want to have some common classes in these 2 boxes within this container. Yeah, so let's come to our style here. So first of all, let me copy this. So when I come to my styles here, I want to target the container, and then inside the container we can have a background color. So we can have a background color of DDD, and then we are not seeing it here because the container doesn't have any size. So let's continue and target the box. We can give it a width, let's say a width of 100 pixels, and then I want a height of 100. Yeah, so now we can see our container. So for the boxes, I want them to have different colors. So for box 1, I want to give it a color of red. For box 2, I want to give it a color of blue. Okay, so looks like our style is not being applied. Let's see the reason. Oh, this is not color, sorry, it's supposed to be background color. So background color red, and then background color blue. Okay, so we have our boxes here. So I wanted to show you that if we add, let's say we add a padding, I think we add some padding of 10 pixels, this will modify the size of our box. So say we had a padding of 100, this will completely change our page. So sometimes this is not the behavior you want, because you want your box to be 100 pixels, that is height and width, and not this size, which will be, this will be 300, because it will be 100 on the left, 100 the width, and then 100 the height. So you might not want your box to have a width of 300. In fact, I can show you. Let me inspect this item. So when I hover on it, you see it has a width of 300 and a height of 300. Yeah, so sometimes that's not the behavior you want. And for us to be able to deal with that, we have a property that's called box sizing. So let me add this still here. In fact, let me reduce it, say 10. 10 pixels padding. So now when I hover on it, you see we have 120, but I don't want my box to be 120. I want it to be 100. So how do I achieve it? How do I achieve that? I can achieve that by adding this property that's called box sizing. And then if I say border box, what will happen is that my element will still be 100. So the padding will be included inside the box. I will not change the size of the box just because I added padding or border. The size of my element will remain the same. Yeah, so this is a very important property. So for example, let's say I only added it here on the box 1. I want to show you the difference. So you see box 1 still maintains the size of 100, but box 2, now that I don't have this property of box sizing, you see the size of my box is changing just because I added the padding. So now let's shift gears. So let's talk about colors and backgrounds. You've seen me use a bunch of colors. For example, we've used red, we've used blue and green. And I'm sure at some point you could be wondering, how do I know the names to use for the colors? As it turns out, HTML supports 140 colors by name. So what you need to do is you just define the color name, and then behind the scene, HTML is able to convert that into the code that a browser is able to understand and represent well. So if I open this link, it will show you a list of colors that are supported by the browser by default. So all you need to do to define these colors is just define the name. So we can see here we have black, blue, brown. But beside that, let's say you have a color that is not among the 140 colors that are defined by default. How do you go about that? Yeah, so we have other ways of representing colors. So we have 3 different common ways we use to represent colors. These are actually the same ways of representing the same colors, only that they use different approaches. So one of the approaches is using RGBA. RGBA stands for red, green, and blue. So different proportions of these colors, these primary colors, can give you different colors. So I can just open here. So for example, here you see we have red, green, blue. You see we can have different proportions of red, green, and blue, giving us different colors. So we can have up to 255 different proportions of red, and up to 255 different proportions of green. Yeah, so all this combined gives you up to 255 times 255 times 255 gives you 16,000. So that means with different proportions, you can get up to 16,000 different colors. So that is more than enough, more than we need. Yeah. So this can give you a lot of colors. Any color you can think of or you can imagine, you can get it using the 3 primary colors. Okay, so beside using RGBA, we can also represent colors using hexacodes. These hexacodes uses hexadecimal. Hexadecimal is another way of representing numbers. For example, mostly we use decimal numbers. Those are numbers with base 10. We also have binary numbers that computer uses, that is zeros and ones. And also we have hexadecimal numbers. So hexadecimal numbers, these are numbers base 16, where, for example, we have this 255 being represented as FF, and this 78 being represented as 57, and this 51 being represented as 33. So it's basically the same way, but we are representing numbers using a different approach. So I can open this. Instead of having RGBA, we can have hash and then FF and then 00 and then 00. In RGBA, we see we have the first value, that is red, as 255. So the same we can represent using FF, and then we have 0 represented by these 2 zeros here. Then we have another 0 represented by these other 2 zeros. So if I change the proportions, you see for red, I'm still at FF, but for the green, when I change to 55, You see I'm representing my color like that. And then when I move here, it has turned to BA. Yeah, so it's basically the same way of representing colors, only that you're using a different approach. As it turns out, actually computers prefer hexadecimal more than decimal numbers, because it's very easy for a computer to convert a hexadecimal number into binary digits, because one hexadecimal digit, it's exactly 4 bytes in terms of binary. Yeah, so I don't want to go into that, but generally it's another alternative of representing RGBA colors. Okay, so beside RGBA and hexadecimal codes, we can also use this hue saturation light. So to show you this, I have an example here. So hue generally means colors, like colors represented in a color wheel, where so this represents a degree. So if you're imagining colors to be in a color wheel, you have 0 all the way to 360. Yeah, so no wonder you're seeing here, we are starting with red, but when we complete the complete rotation, we are returning back to red. So you can see this as a wheel. In fact, I think I have an example here to represent that. So here you see we have a color wheel, and maybe for our case, we might need to change this one to monochromatic. They use this, for example, if you're preparing a color palette, you might want to have colors that are directly opposite. For example, let's say complementary colors. If you have one color here, you have another color that is directly opposite. So they assume that these colors work together, but that is not the focus here. So let me choose monochromatic, where we deal with only one color. So what I want to show you here is when we at 0 degrees, this is red. And then, so this is the color wheel, as you can go round and round and round and round and return to red. Yeah, so this is what we are representing here, where we are starting with red, and then we are changing degrees all the way to 360. So this is how you present hue saturation light. First of all, HSL, and then open brackets, and then we have 0. Yeah, so this is the color now. It can go from 0 all the way to 360. Yeah, so the next value is the saturation. This is the amount of color of the specific color you want. So this is the full color. So this is in percentage. It moves from 100 all the way to 0. So if you don't have the color, if the color saturation is very, very low, you don't see the color, you see gray. But as you increase the saturation, you see the color becomes sharp and sharp. So this is the color saturation. So in most cases, you are fine by just leaving it at 100 so that you have that color in full. And then beside that, we have this other value of light. Light basically means the amount of light that allows you to see the color. So for example, when you turn down the light all the way to 0, you don't see the color. Not that the color is not present. Actually, we have the color, only that we don't have the light to see the color. It's the same way, for example, in your room right now, if let's say you are in a dark room, if you turn on the light, you'll be able to see the items around you. But if you turn off the light, you won't see anything. It doesn't mean that the room is empty. It only means that you don't have the light to see the items in your room. So light enables us to see things. So it's the same concept here, that here we have the color, and then we have the saturation. But for us to see the color, we need some light. We need just enough light to see the color. But if you turn off the light, you don't see the color. But again, I'm saying you need enough light, because if you turn on too much light, again, you don't see. It's like someone using a spotlight and then they are putting it in your face. You don't see because of too much light. You can have it in the middle, just have it as 50. So that is enough light to enable you see. Yeah, so these are the different ways to represent colors. So mostly you'll be using RGBA or hexadecimal colors. Actually, 99% you'll be fine with these two, or even can also add this other one. But for more flexibility, you can use either RGBA or hexadecimal. So let's talk about background properties. So on any HTML element, we have these background properties that we can apply. For example, we can apply a background color to an element. We can add a background image. We can define a background size. We can have a background repeat. So I think the best way to show you this is through an example. Here we have this container that has a background color of this. So I also wanted to add a background image on this container. So first of all, we need to get an image. So let me download an image and then add it here. Let me go to Unsplash. Let's say we want to use this image. You can actually right click and download the image. So let me put it into this project already to make our life easier. Okay, so I've added the image here. You can actually rename the image if you want, but I wanted to add it as a background. So let's come here. So for us to add an image as a background, all we need to do is to come to our container here, and then we can say background. You can say background image, and then you use a value that's called URL, and then you target your image. So in this case, this CSS is in the same folder with the image, so we can just reference it directly. So when you come here, you can just say image. That's the name of our image .jpg. And so make sure you have colons there. And so once we do that, we see we've added the image in the background. Yeah, so as you can see, it's we are only getting a portion of the image, so which allows me to talk about the other properties. We also saw background size. If you say background size, you have different options. You can either say contain. So whatever you have in the background will be contained within the container. Alternatively, you can have something like cover to make sure that it fits within the box of the container. Yeah, beside that, we can have other properties like background repeat. You can say things like no repeat. So now we can't see the effect of this, but in our project, I'll be able to show you the importance of having this property. Yeah, so this is a way of adding a background in a container or any element really. Maybe I can show you. I can even add these properties in an element, like let's say h1. Where is our h1? Here. We have our h1 here. Let's say I wanted to add these properties here. Whatever reason, you can see we have an image in the background because of these properties. Okay, so now let's talk about CSS typography. This includes fonts and text styling. I've also used things like font size, font weight, maybe font style, text decoration, and so on. Yeah, so let's talk about this. So most times you would want to use a specific font of your choosing, because let's say you're doing a website for a client and they want a specific font. There is a way to add a specific font inside your project. Yeah, so one of the common ways is to get it from Google Fonts. So just go to your browser and you can just type Google Fonts. And then from here, you can come here and then you're represented with this page where you can choose the font you want. So here I'm choosing Roboto. So once you do that, you see an option to get font either at the bottom or depending with the size of your browser. This button might be in different places. I just click get font and then you can click get embedded code. And then you see here we are having Roboto. And then below here, we have different ways to include these styles in our project. So one of the ways is using the link. So you can actually copy this. You can copy this and go to your project. So inside the head of your project, you can add this link referencing these styles, or rather this font. Yeah, so I save. So by doing that, I've included my font, that is Roboto, in my project. Yeah, so after doing that, all I need to do is now to say that in this project, I want to use the particular font that I've just included in my project. So as you can see here, we are using the default font by the browser, but we want to change this font. So earlier we talked about inheritance. Yeah, so we can just define the font family. The font family we want to use, we can define it at the root of our HTML document, and then it will be inherited by all the other elements in our project. Yeah, so in HTML, of course, we have the body, but beside the body, we have HTML as the parent of all the other elements. So we can actually target the HTML, or we can even use the body. Let's use the body. So here we define font family, and then we add our font. So our font here from Google, the name of our font is Roboto. So what you need to do is just to add this, the font family. So what this means, you're saying in my body, I want to apply this font that will be inherited in all other elements in my project. So you apply them in order. So we want to use Roboto, but if the browser is not able to load for whatever reason, then you can add a fallback font. So a fallback font here, they're using sans serif. So if I save, you see that the font in our project has changed, and now it looks a little bit better, I would argue. Yeah, so now we are using this font in our project. So that's how easy it is to include a font. Yeah, so now with font, we have font family, we have font size, we have font weight, we have font style. And then for the text, we have these other properties. So we'll be using these properties in our project. So by the end of it, they'll actually become a second nature because you use them so much in that they'll become part of you. So beside the font family, you can also add font weight. For example, you can say 400 as the default font. I'm sure this is the default font weight. So font weight makes your font either bold or it can reduce the boldness of your font. So for example, if I say something like 800, you see what happens. Everything is now bolded. So best practice is just to have it as standard, that is 400. And then if you want to bold a specific element, you can target that particular element. Okay, so we have font weight, and then there are other properties here. For example, we have font size, we have font style, and then beside that, we have text styling, where we have text align, where you can align it either center or right or left. We have letter spacing, we have line height. So let me highlight this. Inside our project, we have these paragraphs. So let's say I want these paragraphs to be aligned at the center. So I can just say text align, say for example center. So this will target all the paragraphs and it will align text in the center. Yeah, beside that, we have the line height. Let's say 1.5. So this is like 150%. This adds some space between lines. We also have more properties that we'll explore more as we work on our project. And actually this will come second nature as you use them again and again. Let's talk about CSS positioning and layout. So every HTML element has a position property value set to static by default. So this follows the natural flow of a document. For example, in our project, we have H1 followed by this container, followed by a paragraph, another paragraph. So this follows the natural flow of our HTML document. But beside that, an element can also be positioned as a relative. this positions an element relative to its normal position. And beside that, we can also position an element as absolute. This position an element relative to its nearest ancestor with the position property set to relative. And beside that, we can position an element as fixed. This will make sure that the element is fixed relative to the viewport, that is the screen in which you are viewing the HTML document. And beside that, we can also position an element as sticky. This sticks an element in a specific position while you scroll through the page. So we are going to see this in an example so that you're able to understand them better. So to demonstrate, I want to add the height to this container. So let's give it a height of, let's say 400 pixels. And then now I want us to start with the absolute position. So let's focus on the red box here. So let's say position absolute. Okay, so when I do that, what happens is that this makes an element to go out of its natural flow. So what's happening here is that the red box is now on top of the blue box. No wonder we cannot see the blue box. So for us to position the red box where we want it to be, we still need to add some properties here. So we can say top. This just tells the browser where to position this element. So we can say top, for example, 0 pixels. And then we can even say left 0 pixels. So what we are saying here, we are saying position this box relative, of course it will be relative to its parent container, or rather relative to its ancestor, nearest ancestor, with the class of relative. But in this case, we don't have an ancestor. If you look at this page, this box, its ancestor, its nearest ancestor is container, but container doesn't have a class of relative. So what happens is that this box is going to the top relative to the body of the whole document, because we don't have a relative class set on this on its parent or its relative ancestor. So here, what you're seeing here is that we are positioning this box relative to the entire document. But let's say we want to add a class relative here. So let's say position relative to the container that contains this box. So what you're seeing here is that we are positioning this box relative to its nearest ancestor, which happens to be the parent in this particular case. Yeah, so here we are saying from the top, position it at 0. So for example, if we were to say you want 10 pixels from the top, these 10 pixels will be 10 pixels from the top of the containing container that has a class of relative. Yeah, so if we were to remove this relative from here, the containing container will be the whole document. So we are saying we have 10 pixels from the top. Yeah, so that's why we need a relative, so that we can say whatever we position absolute, whatever children of this container we position absolute, they will be relative to this container. So in other words, the relative position works hand in hand with the absolute position. Because if we say absolute, then this box will be looking for an ancestor that has a class of relative, or rather has a property of relative. So in this case, the ancestor, the closest ancestor is this container. If it doesn't find an ancestor with that container, then it will be positioned relative to the entire page. Okay, so we need, for us to use position absolute, we also need to use relative in the parent or whatever ancestor we want to use. So we'll have more example of this, so you get to understand it better. So from the top, you can say top, we want 10 pixels, or you can even say top, we want, say, 50%. So we are saying we want it to be 50% from the top of the containing container. So no wonder we are having it here. We can even say 100%. Yeah, so 100% it will actually be outside this container. Yeah, so in this case, we can just say 0%, and then maybe here we can say 50%. If you say 50%, it will be somewhere in the middle. It will start from the middle, 50% from the left side of the containing content, from the left side of the. So if you say 50, it will be at the center, from the left side of the container or containing container. Yeah, so we can have top, or we can even say bottom instead of top. So let's say we wanted to work with the bottom. You can say bottom. So it's saying it's 0 pixels from the bottom. You can even say 10. If you say 10 pixels, it will be 10 pixels from the bottom. So really you can put it wherever you want it to be. Again, instead of saying, for example, 50 from the left, you can say from the right. So let's say from the right position, we want 50%. So let's see that. You see, so from the right of the container, this is the container, we have 50%. So it's 50 from here to here. Yeah, so the most important thing is, first of all, you define the containing container, which can be either the parent or any ancestor, the closest ancestor, where you make sure to have this property defined. So beside that, beside relative and absolute, we can also position an element as fixed, which makes sure that the element stays fixed relative to the viewport. So here we have this button. Let me remove the hover effect on the button. I comment out this code. So when you scroll down, we have our button here. So I want to position this button fixed, in a fixed position. So for us to position this button, all we need to do is to come here and say position, and then we say fixed. So by just doing that, it will position our button relative to the viewport. But again, for us to see the button, we need to add a property where we can say, for example, let's say top, we say 10 pixels, and then left, we can say 10 pixels again. So let's say left, we can say 10 pixels. Yeah, so you see we are positioning our button in a fixed position, where no matter how we scroll, it will be fixed in a specific position. So it can either be top, or we can even say, let's say we want to position it from the right. Yeah, so you see our button, it's 10 pixels from the right and 10 pixels from the top. You can even bump this up and say, for example, 40 from the right, and so on. So that is fixed. So fixed position an element relative to the viewport of the screen. Yeah, so for the fixed, you don't need anything to do with the relative. It just knows that whenever I'm fixed, I'm positioned relative to the viewport. Yeah, so that is fixed. Let's move on to the other one, which is sticky. So sticky position an element in a specific place while scrolling. So for us to be able to see that, maybe we need to add some content here. What I'll do is I just want to duplicate. Let me duplicate a paragraph here. So maybe this one and this one, so that we have more content in our page. If I save, at least we have some room to scroll. So I want to show you how we apply the sticky property. Yeah, so let's focus on our title, learning CSS. Yeah, so on that title, do we have a class to that title? Actually, we don't have a class, but we can target it with the h1. Now that we only have one h1 in this document, so we can come here. I think we have that property defined somewhere. Do we have it? Yeah, we have h1. So all we need to do is to say position, and then we say sticky. So by doing that, it doesn't take effect unless you add a property and say it's positioned from where. So here we can say top. From the top, we want 0 pixels. So once you do that, okay, so once you add that, this element should stick. But what is happening, I think the image is laying on top of this element. So it's taking us to another property that is called z-index. And actually it's the next property we want us to talk about. So z-index, you can just type z-index and say, for example, 20. So this makes sure that this element lies on top of all the other elements. It's stuck on top of all the other elements. Yeah, but what I wanted to show you is the sticky, and then we have position, top, and left. So we are saying it's position 0 from the top, 0 from the left. So this makes sure that this element sticks to the top. And I'm sure you've seen this especially in the navigation menu, where you have navigation menu sticking to the top. So this is how you work with, you position elements in HTML. And actually, we started talking about the z-index. So z-index controls overlapping elements. If you have one element on top of another, you can decide which element you want to come to the top. It's like a stack of paper. So by default, every element has a z-index of 0. But if you add, let's say, 10, it will come to the top. And when you are using a z-index, it has a little gotcha that you need to just take note. It only works on an element that has a position context other than default, which is static. That means for z-index to work, an element has to have a position property. So for z-index to work, you need to make sure that your element has a position property set. And its value can be anything, but it shouldn't be static because static is the default. Anything other than static. That's what I mean. Yeah, so that is a little gotcha you need to just take note that sometimes you can be applying this z-index and then it doesn't work. So you're wondering what's happening. Yeah, so you need a position property set for it to work. So now let's learn about CSS Flexbox. So what is CSS Flexbox? This is one-dimensional layout system that help us in aligning items within a container or within another HTML element, and also helps us in creating responsive designs. Yeah, so this is a very, very important concept in CSS, and luckily it's very straightforward and it will be very easy for you to understand. So I'm going to use examples to go through all these properties we see here, and at the end of that, I'm sure you'll be able to understand this concept very well. So to better understand the idea of Flexbox, I think it will be great if you can work in isolation. So for that reason, I want us to add another file here. So just click New File, and then we can call it CSS Flexbox, or just Flexbox. So flexbox.html. And then once you do that, you can open the file, and then the usual procedure, let's type exclamation mark, enter. We have a boilerplate here, and then we can name it, we can change the title, say CSS Flexbox. And then inside the body, I can also add another title here, H1, and call it CSS Flexbox. Okay, so with this, let's link this page to our main project so that we can be able to navigate to that page. So for us to achieve that, let's add a H3, and then inside that we'll have our anchor link that will take us to the page. A H3, then inside it we have an anchor tag, and then inside it we can say the destination of this anchor tag is the page we've just created. So flexbox.html, and then for a text, we have text between the anchor tag here. So we can say CSS Flexbox. Okay, so when we do that, if you scroll up, you see this link. So when we click this link, it will take us to the page that we want to work in. Now, so this is the page. So here, I'm going to use internal CSS so that we can do everything within one page and better understand the concepts. Yeah, so just type style. Okay, so make sure that this element is inside the head element. Yeah, so after you do that, first of all, I want to target the body and add some space around our page. So you can add some padding and then say 40 pixels. So this will add padding all around. And then beside that, let's now create our container where we'll apply CSS Flex. So now let's add our container that will ultimately convert into Flex container. And so we can add a div with a class of container. So for you to do that, you can just say dot container. So inside this container, I want to add a bunch of divs. You can say div and then times 6 asterisk 6, and then it will create a bunch of divs. And then I want to say CSS Flexbox is easy to learn. Okay, so I can say CSS. Yeah, so we have a bunch of items inside our container. So now we can style our container. I want to add some background color inside our container. So I can just say container. And then I want first of all to add some padding. Let's say 10 pixels all around. And then I can add a background color. I can say BCC. And then hash DDD. By the way, when using hexadecimal color code, if you're having a color code that has, let's say, 6 characters that are the same, you can actually simplify that and just have 3. This will still work. Okay, so we have our container. So I want to add some background color on these boxes. Yeah, so I want to target every box that is a direct child of this container. Yeah, so for us to achieve that, there is a certain selector you can use here. I didn't show you, but here we go. So if you want to select every direct child of the container element, you can use this selector where we are saying container and then a forward arrow and then asterisk. So this is to say select every element that is a direct child of a container. So this will select all the divs, and it will not apply to, let's say, assume we had another element inside here. This is not a direct child of a container, so it won't apply here, but it will apply on all of these divs. Yeah, so with that, let's say we want to add a background color of blue again. Okay, so with our blue, we have all these items now have a background color. So now we can proceed to convert this container into a Flex container. So for us to do that, it's very simple. All we need to do is to add a property called display and then just say display flex. So immediately you do that, all our items are converted into flex items. Yeah, so you can see them here being displayed side by side. So maybe for us to see them better, I can increase the size or the font size of these elements. So I can say font size. Let's say something like 26 pixels. We can even make it bigger. Let's say 30. And then we can change the color. Now that the background is dark, we can make it white. FFF will give us white. And then maybe we add some padding within those boxes. So we can add some padding here and say padding of something like 6 pixels. Yeah, so at least we have some padding within those boxes. Okay, so these are the things, just styling. All these are styling the boxes. But as for Flexbox, we've only talked about one property, which is a flex, display flex, which converts our box into a flex container. But beside that, we have another property that we can apply inside a flex container. That property is gap. So gap allows us to add gap between the flex items. So if I say 10, you see we have a gap of 10 between our flex items. Yeah, so let's say we had this container having a certain size in terms of height. I can show you here. So I want us to add some height on this container. So let's say this container has a height of, can work with 300 pixels. Yeah, I wanted to show you something. So let's say our container, our main container has a height of 300 pixels. What will happen is that it will stretch the flex items to have equal height to the available space within the container. So that's what is happening here. So by default, each of these flex items usually stretch to take the height of their container. Yeah, so this is the default behavior, but we can change that, of course. Yeah, so one of the ways to change that is to use another property that is applied within a flex container. This property is called align items. So by default, this property is set to stretch. So when I make it stretch, nothing changes. But when I say, for example, center, you will see that all our items are placed in the center of this container. Yeah, so align items is able to align our items either stretch by default or center, or you can even have flex start, where you align your items to the start of the container, or flex end. Okay, so when we remove it, it will just take the default, which is align items stretch. You see, the elements will stretch. So let's leave it at align items, just for your reference, align items stretch, which is the default for now. And beside that, we also have another property called justify content. This is used to align items along the main axis. So when you have a flex container, by default, we have this as the main axis. What we have as horizontal axis is usually the main axis. And then the vertical axis is called the cross axis. Yeah, so justify content aligns items across the main axis. But again, there is a way you can change the axis where you make this to be the cross axis and this to be the main axis. I'm going to show you that also. Yeah, so for now, by default, justify content aligns item across the main axis. So here we can say again, the default setting for this is flex start. So when I add flex start, nothing changes. But if I say flex end, you see the difference. All my items will be aligned across the main axis to the end. I can also say center to align my items at the center. And also there is another property. I can say space between. So space between will distribute my flex items so that I have equal space between the items. And then we have another one, space around. Space around creates equal space around my items. And then we also have space evenly. Space evenly ensures that the space between items is equal all across. Yeah, so we can leave it at space between. So you see, using Flexbox, it's very easy to align your items and just make sure that there is uniformity in how you display your items. Okay, let me change a property here so that I show you something. So let's say we want to align our items, flex start, across the cross axis. So assuming that we had many items that are not able to fit in this container, what will happen? So let's do that by duplicating these. And then if I save, you see our items are overflowing the container because we have so many items that they can't fit our container. So by default, this is what happens. If you have many items, more than the container can handle, they overflow. But there is another property we can use inside this container that will help us deal with this, and that is called flex wrap. So when we add flex wrap, and then the property is wrap, you will see that the extra items will wrap, and then we'll just jump to another line. And the good thing is that this gap, if for example I was to allow it to stretch, in fact we can do that. you can say stretch, you will see that the gap between these items, that is vertically, it's also the same. Yeah, so you can allow items to wrap if you have more items than your browser can handle, or rather than the page can handle, you can do that. So these items are stretching because the container has some height, but what will happen if the container didn't have some height? So let's remove this height, and then you see. So this is how they will look if the container doesn't have any height. And they just take the available space, and then they can nicely wrap into the next line. Okay, so let me add this height so that I can show you yet another property that is used to align these items within the container. There is another property that's called align content. This is rarely used, so I'm just having it here just for the sake of completeness. So align content also has, for example, center. So you see, this is used to align. If you have a container that is bigger than the items, you can align the content. So this is serving all these items as content, as one. Yeah, so you can align your content using this property. You can say align center or align flex end. So we are aligning them as a group, or flex start. But again, this property only works if your container has some height. You see, if I remove the height, it doesn't have any effect. If I say flex start or center, it's just the same. Yeah. So rarely will you use this property, but I wanted to show you so that you know that we have this property that you can use if we have a flex container that is bigger than the content. But in this case, the height of the container is being defined by the height of its content. Yeah, so these are the properties that you can apply on the flex container. But we have other properties that you can apply on the flex item. Yeah, so these are the flex items we have. Remember, this is targeting all direct children of the container, which in our case, these are divs inside the container. Yeah, so effectively, this is a flex item. So you can see that's where we are applying our color blue, and we have the color for the text. And we have padding and font size. Yeah. So for me to show you some of the properties we can apply on the flex items, allow me to add some styles on some specific items. For example, this one, I can add a class and say easy. Yeah, that is for the text easy. And then maybe I can add one for another class here. I say Flexbox. Let me just say flex. Flex text so that I don't confuse you. Yeah, so the reason I'm adding here, I want to apply some specific styles to these particular items so that we see how they'll differ with the rest. So let's turn on the height we had, so that our items are stretch. But on this particular one, I want to show you what will happen if we have a specific setting for a specific item. So for example, let's say let's target the item with the flex item with the class easy. So you see, all of them are being stretched by default. All the items are being stretched by default. But we can target a specific item and say, for example, this one, we say align self. We say align self, we can say align self center. So it's the same property we use in the container, in the flex container, but this is only applying for a specific item. So we are saying all the items are being stretched, but for the easy item, we want it to be aligned center. You can even say flex start. It will align to the start, or flex end. Yeah, so this is quite useful, especially if you want to apply a specific styling to just one item, so that it's arranged the way you want. So beside align self, we have another property. We can say flex grow. And then this property usually takes a number. You can say either 0. 0 means don't grow. But if you say 1, it will grow, it will stretch to take any extra space. So you see here, this item, if I reduce it to 0, you can see we're having this size. So beside align self, we have another property that's called flex grow. So this takes either 0, 0 means don't grow, or 1. So when you say flex grow 1, if I save, you see the difference? It has stretched the item to take any extra space so that this item takes as much space as it's available. So for us to see it better, maybe we can apply that class to this other easy, because we have an extra space that's not occupied here. So let me just add this style. Instead of having it here, let me add it here in this other text. Yeah, so that you can see it better. So what's happening here, this item is being stretched. So beside applying this where we are saying we want to align it to the end, we're also saying flex grow. So when you change this to 0, it won't grow. It will just take space that it only needs to display the content. But if you say flex grow, it grows as much as it's possible. So beside flex grow, we also have flex shrink. So this also takes 0 if you don't want the element to shrink. That is, if let's say we don't have enough space to fit all the elements, by default these elements shrink so that they can fit as much content as possible. So if you say 0, it won't shrink. And then beside that, we can also have another property that's called flex basis. Using this property, you can add a size to an element. So for example, let's say we want this item to be 200 pixels. Yeah, so you're defining the width of a flex item using this basis, using this property. Yeah, so this looks like a lot because all these properties can be difficult to just understand. It turns out there is a better way. So instead of defining all these properties separately, you can just say flex. And then the first property will stand for grow. So you can say, I don't want this to grow. Sorry, there is a typo here. So you can say flex grow, the first property. And then for the second property is shrink 0. And then you can have, let's say, your width here. So this doesn't change anything because what we are saying is we are saying flex grow, 0 don't grow, shrink don't shrink, that is 0. And then we have a width. But if you want it to grow, you can say 1 and 1. So this will mean it has this width, but again, if there is available space, it's allowed to grow. And at the same time, it has this width, but it's allowed to shrink if there is no enough space. So maybe for me to demonstrate that, I can inspect here and then just try to shrink this screen. Then you see, so you see it can shrink. It's allowed to shrink, and also it's allowed to grow because of this property. Yeah, so in most cases, we usually say, we usually use flex, just flex 1. If you want an item to grow and occupy as much space as it wants. And by default, it's allowed to shrink. It's also allowed to grow. Yeah, so I think this is the default. By default, if you just say flex 1, it's also allowed to shrink, to grow, and shrink. Okay, so beside that, there is one more property that we can apply on the flex items. And that property is called order. So by default, each of these elements have an order of 0 by default. But if you want, for example, let's say we want this land to come to at the beginning, we can give it an order of less than 0 so that it's arranged at the beginning. Yeah, so we can say, for example, order, let's say, if we say -1 on the easy, remember we are selecting the easy. it will come at the beginning because this order allows it to come to the front. If you want it to go to the end, we can say something like 1, and then it goes all the way to the end. Or you can even have it like 3, for example. It still goes all the way to the end. Yeah, so this is very useful, especially if you are doing some responsive design. Let's say you want your items to display this way on a bigger screen, but when you go to a smaller screen, you want them to display in a certain way. So you can use this property that is applied on the flex item. Okay, so before we finish on Flexbox, I told you that by default, the horizontal axis is usually the main axis, and the vertical axis is usually the cross axis. This is because by default, CSS Flexbox has a property called flex direction that is set to row. However, we can change this property and set it from flex direction row to flex direction column. So when you do that, what happens is that we change the order such that the horizontal axis becomes the cross axis, and then the vertical axis becomes the main axis. So when that happens, the behavior of these two properties changes. For example, align items works vertically by default. However, when we change the direction to flex direction column, it will now work horizontally. And then for the justify content, instead of working horizontally, it will now work vertically. So that is the only change, but any other thing works the same. Okay, so to better demonstrate that, first of all, I want to remove the height so that the height is determined by the items themselves. Beside that, I want to reduce the number of items being displayed. And then when I do that, you will see this is the default behavior where justify content is working horizontally, such that if I say, for example, flex start, you see it aligns things at the start. If I say flex end, everything will be aligned to the end. So by default, it's working across the horizontal axis. And this is because of a property here that's called flex direction that is set to row. So no wonder when I add this property, nothing changes because this is the default anyway. However, a difference comes in when I change this to column. If I do column, now justify items will work vertically and align items will work horizontally. So for align items, you see our items are stretching because align items is set to stretch. So if you change this to flex start, you will see everything will be aligned to the start because now the item align items is working across the horizontal axis. If I say center, I think you'll see it better. You see now align items is working across the horizontal axis. So I don't want this to confuse you. Just visualize it as just changing the order, but everything else remains to work the same. Okay, so beside that, flex direction can either be column, but it can also be column reverse. If I say column reverse, you will see it's yes column, but the order is reversed. At the same time, we can say row reverse. So first of all, maybe I can say row before I say row reverse. That we follow step by step. If I say row, this is the default. But if I say row reverse, you will see what happens, reverse. And again, the row is the default. So, okay, so don't worry, we'll have a lot of practice. So when you do it over and over, it actually stick. Okay, so actually that covers all the properties we have on Flexbox container and also the flex item. So we are going to practice this in our project and you will even understand them better. Okay, so you will have this for reference as you learn. So we've actually covered all these properties. Okay, so beside CSS Flexbox, we also have CSS Grid, which works very well with the CSS Flexbox, and they actually complement one another. So what is CSS Grid? CSS Grid is two-dimensional layout system that also help us in arranging items in our page and also helps with creating complex layouts and making them responsive. Lucky for us, the concepts are quite straightforward, even though at the beginning they might be intimidating. But when we work through them, you realize that they're not so difficult to understand. So these are the various properties we have on CSS Grid. We have properties that are applied on the grid container, and we have properties that are applied on the grid items. Yeah, so let's have a closer look into CSS Grid. So let's create another HTML file for CSS Grid. So I come here, create a new file. We can call it CSS Grid or just grid.html. And then we can say exclamation mark, enter. And let's create some space here. And then here we can say CSS Grid. And then we can also have h1, say CSS Grid. Okay, and then let's go to our index file and link this file again. So we can just click on this and then Shift Alt to duplicate the line. And then instead of Flexbox, we say Grid, HTML Grid. And then here we can say CSS Grid. Okay, so when we do that, we can go back to our home page. And then once we are here, I believe when we refresh, let's refresh the page, we'll see another link here, CSS Grid. So just click on CSS Grid, and then we land on this page where we can start learning about CSS Grid. Yeah, so let's create a container that will contain a bunch of grid items. And say container. And then inside this container, that's where we'll have our elements. So we can say a div. And then I want a bunch of divs. So I can use an asterisk, and then inside it, okay, I can say 6 first, and then I use curly brackets. I want to have some text inside these divs. So I can say box. And then I want to have box 1 all the way to box 6. I can use a $sign. This will make sure that I have 1 all the way to 6. So if I close, I see this auto suggestion. So if I click enter, I'm able to create my boxes like this. Yeah, so again, if you want to do that, you can just type div, whatever element that you're dealing with, and then asterisk times 6, then curly brackets, and then whatever text you want inside there. So in my case, I want box, and then I use a $sign. And then once I click enter, you see where there is a $sign, I'm replacing it with a number. Yeah, so that is pretty neat there. Yeah, so beside that, I want to apply my styles inside here using inline styling. So again, we have a style element, and then I want some spacing around my page. Yeah, so first of all, I need to select the body, okay? And then I have padding. So I can say 40 pixels again. And then once we have that, let's also target our container. And then here, we can also add some background color. So background color, let's still go with DDD, this gray. And then now I want to target my boxes. Actually, I want to give these boxes some class. So I can type, or even easier, I can generate this again. So let me just say div. Okay, I can say div. Each div, I want it to have a class of box. And then it should have another class of, let's say, box 1 all the way to 6. So here I can use some brackets here. I want 6 of these. And then by the inside here, I want some text. Let's see if it will work. So we say box, and then I want some text here. Okay. So you see we have some boxes here. So by the way, if you experience any challenge with that, you can type them manually. You can just have, for example, one box, and then you click on it, and then you just duplicate, and then you just edit these values here. So let me Control Z to go back to what I had. So these are my boxes. So first, I want to target each and every box and add some color. Yeah, so here I can target the boxes directly. So we can say, let's give them a color, a background color of red for a change. And then give it a padding. So every box we give it a padding of, let's say 10 pixels all round. And then font size we can give it 20 pixels. Font weight, let's make it 600 to make it a little bit bold. And then font color. So font color, you just say color, and then we can say hashtag FFF. This will give us white. Yeah, so we have our boxes here. So now let's turn our focus to CSS Grid. Yeah, so first of all, the first thing you do is to convert your container into a grid container so that you can be able to use CSS Grid features. Yeah, so first thing we do is we target the container and convert it into a grid container. Yeah, so how we do that is we come to our container and then we say display, display grid. Yeah, so that's the first step. So for us to see the container better, allow me to add some padding here. Let's say padding 20 pixels. That is around the container so that we can see our container better together with the items. Yeah, so we've converted our container into a grid container. So this is effectively a grid container. But for us to see any difference, we need to start applying more properties on this. So one of the properties is gap. We can have gap and say gap, let's say we need a gap of 10 pixels. And so this will add a gap between these boxes. But now you can see the boxes are being stacked one on top of another. But at least we can uniquely identify different boxes. Yeah, so beside the gap, we can have columns, our items arranged in different columns, and also row. So the most important property here, it's a property called grid template columns. Grid template columns. So when you start typing, you will see it. So assuming we want 2 columns, this allows us to define the width of the columns we want. So for example, you can say, let's say you want a column 200 pixels and another one 300 pixels. If you do this, you see our items have been arranged in 2 columns. So this column is 200, this other one is 300. We can make it double so that it's clearly visible. Yeah, so you can see this one is 200, this one is 400. So we have 2 columns. We can add another column. So adding another column is very easy. All you need to do is this represent a column, and then you have some space, and then add another column. So we can add another column here. We can give it, let's say, 100 pixels. So this will effectively make 3 columns. So as you can see, we don't have enough space to display all of them. So maybe I can reduce the size of this just to show you. So yeah, so here you can see this column is the same as this, but this one is 100, is half of the other columns. So we can define the number of columns we want, and at the same time, we can also define the number of rows we want. Columns are from top, bottom, and then rows are from left to right. So the same way we can define columns, we can also define grid rows. But in most cases, we usually we are usually okay by just defining columns, not unless you have a specific use case. But all the same, if you wanted to define some row, we can say grid template row instead of column. And then we say, let's say we want the first row to have a height of 200 pixels. So you see, the first row, it has a height defined. The rest, we don't have a height defined for the second row. But if you define it, you can say, for example, let's say we say 100 pixels. You see the second row will also have a height of 100 pixels. But in most cases, we usually leave this height to be defined by the content within that row. Yeah, so for this one, maybe I can just leave it here for reference, but let me comment it out. So we are defining the width of our columns and not the rows. So we've used a gap that is able to define the gap between items, both horizontally and vertically. So you see the gap is 10, but what if you needed a different gap for vertically and horizontally? You can achieve this where instead of using a gap, you can actually define them as, let's say, row gap. You can say row gap. Let's say row gap, we want something like 20 pixels for the row gap. Let's say we want a column gap. You want something like 10 pixels. So you can see on the row, we have this gap between one row and another. In fact, you can make it bigger so that you see the difference. Let's make it 40. So between the row, we have a gap of 40, but between the columns, this column and this column, we have a gap of 10 pixels. Yeah, so by being specific, you can actually target the gap for the row and the gap for the column. But in most cases, if you want all of them to be the same, you're okay with just having a gap. And say, for example, I want a gap of 10. So this means both the row and the column. Okay, so what happens if, for example, you don't know the width of these columns? Or let's say these columns, you want them to be responsive and to adapt to different screens. Instead of using fixed units, like for example, 200 pixels and 100 pixels, you can actually use a better version of this, where still you define your grid template columns. So grid template columns, and then instead of just defining a fixed unit, you can say 1FR. For example, 1FR again, some space here, 1FR, and then 1FR. 1FR means a fractional unit. So instead of defining a specific width, you can say out of this space, I want you to have one fractional unit, one fractional unit, one fractional unit. Yeah, so in this case, it means that all the boxes will have equal width. But let's say I wanted the second box to be a little bit longer in terms of width. I can say something like 1.5 fractional unit. So that means this will almost be twice the other elements. In fact, I can make it twice the size of the other element so that you see. So this is 2 fractional unit, this is 1, this is 1. Yeah, so this box is twice the other boxes. This is very good in that it's able to adjust to the size of the screen and maintain the proportion. Okay, so let's go back to this. Let's say we want all of them to have the same width. And so instead of doing it like this, there is yet another way where you can make this better by saying grid template columns. And from our example here, you can see that these widths are all the same. So instead of just writing them again and again and again, you can use an inbuilt function that's called repeat. And then you say, I want to repeat 3 times. And then the width, I want it to be 1 fractional unit. So when you save, this will give you the same result, where we are saying we want 3 columns. And then after that, we want all of these columns to have the same width. So this will define the first 3 columns. But also you can also add another column. Let's say you wanted 4 columns, and then we want the 4th column to have 100 pixels. You can still do that. So what will happen is that all these other ones will be 1 fractional unit, but this other one, the last one will have a width of 100 pixels. Maybe to show the difference, I can make it smaller. Let's make it 50. So you can see, first, we are having 3 columns that are 1 fractional unit each. And then the 4th one, we have it as 50 pixels, this last one. So instead of making them 3, maybe we can make them 2 here so that we see them better. Yeah, so this function is very, very important, especially in helping us create a responsive layout where it's able to adjust based on the size of the screen, for example. Okay, so let's say we had more items. So let me highlight this and Shift Alt downward arrow to duplicate. So if you add more items, you see they just follow the same structure where we still have 3 columns. But earlier we learned that CSS Grid help us in creating responsive design. So sometimes when, let's say you are in a very small screen, you might want to display not 3 columns, but maybe 1, depending on the size of the screen. How do you achieve that? You can still achieve that using something here. So instead of defining and saying, maybe I can comment out this one so that I explain that better. Say grid template column, grid template columns. Assume we had a repeat, and then we have 3 columns, and then each column is one fractional unit. If I have something like that, on a smaller screen, I might want to have, let's say, 2 columns or 1 column. And maybe as I go to a bigger screen, I might want to fit more columns because I have enough space. How do you achieve that? To achieve that, instead of defining that I need 3 items, I can say, let me duplicate this and then comment out this. Instead of saying 3, I can say here I want auto fit to allow the grid to determine the number of items I can have here. And then here, the only thing I need to define here is use another function that's called min-max. This allows us to have 2 values where we say the minimum possible value I want for this container is, for example, 200 pixels, but the maximum can be 1 fractional unit. So using min-max allows your items to adjust accordingly, where we are saying the minimum possible width I want for my element is 200, but it can expand. It can go as much as it wants if we have enough space. Yeah, so this auto fit allows your browser to decide how many elements to display. So if I increase the size, let me just increase, you see at some point I'm having how many items? I'm having 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 columns. And then as I reduce my screen, here I have 4. As I reduce, I have 3. As I reduce, I have 1. So effectively, our browser is able to adjust depending with the number of items we have. So this is what makes CSS Grid very, very powerful in terms of creating responsive designs. Now, beside these 4 properties, that is display grid, gap, and grid template columns and grid template row, we also have some properties that we can apply directly to the grid items. And for me to show that, first of all, I need to give our grid item some height. So let's say our boxes have a height of 150 pixels. So I can add that. Let's say height 150 pixels. Yeah, so when I add that, you see the change here. We can actually place different boxes in different places. First, maybe I can turn on my inspector to show you something. If I go to the container inside my inspector tool and then click grid, how I get here is just right clicking on the page, inspector or inspect, and then when I hover on my page and turn on grid, you will see that our grids are numbered. Let me create some space here and also maybe increase the size. Okay, I want to have more grids or rather more columns. So what I can do here is setting my minimum to something like 100. I can have it as 150. And so the minimum possible width is 150, and then it can stretch if there is space. Yeah, so with this, at least we have more items in the preview that we can work with. So I wanted to show you that here we have this column, first column, second column, third column, and they are numbered. So our developer tool help us to see the numbering of these items. So from here, this is the beginning of the first column. You can see 1, and this is the end of the first column. At the same time, this is the beginning of the second column, the end of the second column, the beginning of the third column, the end of the third column. And then here we have 4, which is the end of the third column, as I said. And then for the row, we have the row number 1 starts here and ends here. Row number 2 starts here, ends here. Yeah, so these are very helpful, especially if you want to place our items in specific location. Yeah, so inside our boxes, remember we have specific classes for the specific boxes. So we can target this and place these specific boxes in specific location. For example, let's say we wanted to place this box number 6, we wanted to place it here. How do we go about it? So let's say we wanted to place box number 6, we wanted to place it here. How do we go about it? So first of all, we choose the unique identifier of that particular item. So in this case is the box number 6. So we can choose box number 6. That is the class. So when you come here, let's have our class. And then to place an item in a specific position, we have two properties that we use. So first of all, you can say grid column. So with this, we can say we want this item number 6, the one we are targeting with this class, we want it to be in the beginning of column number 1. You see the numbering. We want it to come here. So it will be in column number 1, this line 1, all the way to line 2. So you can say grid column 1 to 2. Yeah, so this will take this item from here to this column. So now it's down here because we've only defined the column. So what you do, you add a grid row, and then you say, I want this item to start from row number 1 and end in row number 2, where row number 2 starts. So effectively, you can see our element is now here. So the box number 1 has been replaced, and this box is now here. So you can use the same principle to just have different boxes in different places. And by the way, a box can also span more than one column or one row. So for example, we are saying box 6, we want it to start from column 1 and end to at column 2. You can make it stretch and say, let's say we want it to end at column 3. You can just type 3 here and then see. So box number 6 will span from column 1 all the way to column 3. So this box is able to span through and occupy like the space for 2 boxes. So we can even have it span all the way to the end. What you do, you can say, I want it to span all the way to the end. And then it will span to column 4. And if you have a look at this, you also see that it's also numbered, like the end of column 4 is numbered as -1. So instead of saying column number 4, you can even say -1. This will mean that just go straight from column 1 all the way to the end. Okay, so let's do a little exercise just to practice what we are learning here. So I want us to replicate this grid container together with the grid items we see here. So when you have a look, you see it looks like we have how many columns? We have 1, 2, 3. And then in terms of row, we have 1, 2, 3, 4. So 3 columns, 4 rows. Yeah, so let's replicate this. So yeah, I think we can, let's work with a different box. We can create another one here. And so let's say container 2. We can just say cont2 just to save us some time. And then here for the div, I want to give them a class of item. So let's say item, and then here we have item. So I want item 1 all the way to item 6. So I can use the $. And then here I use brackets. And then I say I want how many items? I want 6 items. So I can say asterisk times 6. And then in terms of content, within every item, I need some content. So maybe I can say just this, a $, so that I have numbers there. Yeah, so if I type 6, I can see the autocomplete. Yeah, so we are giving them different properties so that they don't interfere with what we have here. So maybe I can add some divider. Let me add horizontal rule, HR, so that we have a clear division between what we have at the top and what we are about to create. Yeah, so let's target this cont1 together with item. Yeah, so here we come here, we say cont2 rather. Yeah, so what we want is we can give it a background color. So let's just give it a background color of DDD. That's fine. And then we add some padding, padding of 40 pixels, just as we've been doing. And then now inside this container, that's where we want to work with our items. Yeah, so let's target all those items using the common class, which is item. And then we give them a background color of that color was something close to this. So let's just give them that color, and then we can give them a padding of, let's say, 10 pixels. Actually, I want us to change this color. So instead of having it that bright, you can have it a little bit darker. Yeah, so let's save that. And then now we need to brighten our text. So we can say color. Let's give it a color of white. And that is FFF. And then now we have our items here. So just to see them better, we can add some gap inside here. But before we do that, we need to convert this container into a grid container. So we say display a grid. And then here we can now add some gap. So let's say we want a gap of 10 pixels again. So you see we have some gap between our items. So now let's work on our columns and our rows. So we had 3 columns. So we can say grid template columns. We need 3 columns. So these columns were pretty much the same. So we can say repeat. We want 3, and then I can say 1 fractional unit for each. Okay, let me confirm the size. Yeah, so they're pretty much the same. And then for the rows, again, we have 1, 2, 3, 4. And then this looks like twice the other rows. Yeah, so we can define that as well. So let's work with the rows now. So we say grid template rows. Then once we choose that, so we have 4 rows. So the first rows are the same. So we can say we can start small and say 1 fractional unit, and then 1 FR, and then the second one is twice the other ones. We can say 2 FR, and then finally we have 1 FR. Yeah, so we've defined that. So what we need to position our items so that we get the layout we want. So how do we want it to be? We want the first one to stretch from the beginning to the end. So the first item, that is item 1. We can target item 1. We want it to stretch from, so actually let's turn on the numbers so that you can be able to see well what we are working with. So when I come here, down here, I want to select this element. So cont2, I want to highlight the grids so that we're able to see them better. So you want the first item to span from column 1 all the way to the end. So we can say a grid column, grid call, and then we say we want it to span from 1 all the way to -1. -1 takes you to the very end. Yeah, so you can see we are getting that. So from 1 all the way to -1. And then what else do we want to do? Now we want the second item to span from row number 2. Remember, this is 1, then 2, 3, and then 4. So we want it to span from row number 2 all the way to 4. So here on item number 2, you can come here and say item the class. So item 2, we want it to span from row. So you can say grid row. We want it to span from row number 2 all the way to row number 4. Yeah, so by doing that, you can see our item is spanning from here all the way down. So what else do we need to do? So here we want item number 5 to span from This is column 1, 2. So to span from column 2 to the very end, we can select item number 5. You want it to stretch from column, so grid call 2 to the very end. So at very end you can say -1. So you see this item is spanning all the way. And then now we have item number 6, which is spanning from column 1 to the very end. So item number 6, it's spanning from so grid call. You can just type grid call and then choose the first option 1 all the way to the very end. Yeah, so with that, we have our layout here. So you can see this is effectively twice this other one because of what we have here. Because of what we have here. If you decide to increase this one, let's say we want this to be 3 times the others, then we'll have this container being much bigger. So you can change it to 2. And then here, by the way, you can also simplify this. And for example, say instead of repeating yourself, you can duplicate this line. Let me comment it out here. And then here I can say repeat 2 times, rather 2 times, and then 1 FR. So with this, nothing will change because still we'll have how many rows? We'll have 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, so this makes up 2, and then 1 and another 1. Okay, so that is how you can apply positioning specific items to create such a layout. Yeah, so grid, CSS grid makes this very, very simple. So actually, this marks the end of this general overview. So now we are going to put in practice everything we've learned in building our amazing website that I showed you earlier. So maybe just to remind you, this is the website we're going to build. I can increase the size here so that you see it better. So this amazing website is what we're going to build now with the knowledge we've learned in terms of styling and using CSS. So we are going to create something like this. So this will be very quick because we've covered everything that you need to know about CSS. So when you put it in practice, that's when you see how you actually apply what you've learned. So see you in the next video.